Heartwarming encounter. Rich woman's shocking act reveals incredible truth about a poor old woman. Margaret was the picture of success, with her tailored designer suit hugging her curves just right as she dashed through the bustling streets of her affluent suburban town. The aroma of gourmet coffee wafted across the plaza, filled with the sound of laughter and chatter from those around her. Every step was a reminder of her wealth and status, but amid the glitz, a dark undercurrent of emptiness swirled inside her. She was always racing to the next glamorous gala, mingling in circles of luxury, but a growing void gnawed at her heart. As she hurried toward yet another charity event that demanded her presence, the spring air was electric with anticipation. Phones buzzed, and high heels clicked against the pavement, creating a rhythm in sync with her racing pulse. When it happened, she collided with Ruth, an elderly woman with frail bones and a weathered face lined with life's struggles. At first, Margaret barely registered the impact. She gasped in annoyance, ready to shake off the disruption when Ruth smiled gently and offered her half of a meager sandwich. "Here, dear. There's enough for everyone," Ruth said, her voice a soothing balm. Margaret hesitated, taken aback by the kindness emanating from someone perceived as invisible. Watching Ruth share her snack with children playing nearby, a spark ignited in Margaret's heart. Little hands reached for the sandwich, laughter ringing out amidst the chaos of the affluent world she had come to know. In that moment, Margaret's heart began to crack open, and feelings of guilt washed over her. The glitz of her evening ahead began to lose its shine. She glanced down at her perfectly manicured nails, her expensive jewelry seeming to weigh heavily on her conscience. Was this truly success? A sudden urgency bloomed within her. She couldn't ignore the truth that stared back at her through Ruth's kind eyes. But the moment was fleeting. The following week, news swept through her community about a new ordinance targeting the homeless, and Ruth's fate hung in the balance. The authorities harassed her, pushing her deeper into the shadows. An unsettling wave of indignation filled Margaret. How could her peers, the very same people who would toast to charity over champagne, cause suffering to someone like Ruth? As she prepared for the gala, a rumble of anxiety twisted in her stomach. The glittering ballroom, decorated with crystal chandeliers, felt stifling. When the hostess dismissed Ruth's struggles with a casual comment, something snapped inside Margaret. The very people she sought to impress were now the ones perpetuating injustice. In a bold moment of clarity, Margaret stood up during a lull in the festivities. "We need to talk about Ruth," she exclaimed, her voice cutting through the chatter. Shocked gasps filled the air, but she pressed on, her heart pounding with every word. As the room fell silent, she shared Ruth's hidden story, a dedicated war veteran who had sacrificed everything for her country, now abandoned by the system. Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. The room erupted in whispers, faces shifting from indifference to realization. A collective gasp filled the air as Margaret's voice carried the weight of truth. She wasn't just standing up for Ruth. She was standing for every invisible soul in her town. It was time for a change. Margaret felt a spark light within her, a fierce determination to leverage her resources for justice. As they prepared for a board meeting to address the ordinance, she peered into the eyes of the two women, one a powerful businesswoman and the other a frail veteran. In that moment, they were no longer worlds apart. Margaret inhaled sharply, heart racing. Would she truly sacrifice her safety and success to uplift Ruth's voice? The answer lingered in the air, heavy and unyielding, inviting her to step outside the boundaries of her privileged life. Margaret couldn't shake the weight of her decision as she walked into the boardroom. The grand table gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the faces around her were a mix of intrigue and disdain. The air was thick with tension. This was not just about policies anymore. It was personal. She could feel the clench in her stomach, a mix of fear and resolve battling for dominance. As the meeting began, she prepared herself. The chairwoman, poised and elegant, led the discussion with practiced ease. "We must think about our reputation," she said, with a tone that oozed superiority. "This ordinance is essential for maintaining order in our town. We can't let these disturbances shape our community." Margaret clenched her fists, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. "But what about Ruth?" she interrupted, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. Eyes turned, eyebrows raised. "What about her story? She deserves a fighting chance, just like anyone else." The room froze, a silent standoff hanging in the air. Margaret held her breath, daring to glance at the gathered faces. Some looked disinterested, but others were shifting in their seats, the seed of doubt beginning to take root. The chairwoman's eyes narrowed, assessing her. "Ruth is merely an unfortunate circumstance," she spat, dismissing Margaret's plea. "We need to think strategically about our community's future. Compassion can't outweigh practicalities. Or has compassion ever been practical?" Margaret shot back. The words left her mouth unfiltered. The courage she felt caught her off guard, as if a part of her had broken free from the constraints of her former life. The room felt smaller, the walls edging in closer, demanding her to choose sides. "I know we have money to spare," she continued, her voice steadying. "What if we allocated some of our funds to help people like Ruth? We could start a program to get the homeless support, housing, medical assistance, job training. Can we honestly call ourselves a community while ignoring those in need?" Around the table, murmurs rose and fell like waves. Some faces were tight, unwilling to entertain the idea, while others displayed a flicker of contemplation. It was as if Margaret had tapped into something deeply buried below the surface: fear, resentment, and maybe even guilt. Yet she wasn't done. She felt the momentum shift. "Ruth fought for our freedom. She deserves our support, not our scorn," she declared, no longer caring about the elegant social game she had once thrived in. "If we don't fight for her, what does that say about us? Are we really that disconnected?" Applause erupted, startling her as the younger members of the board broke the silence. Some older members shifted uneasily, flabbergasted by the sudden tide of support. Margaret's heart raced as she took in their expressions. This was not just a debate, it was a moment of potential awakening. The chairwoman's expression was a mask of fury. "I can't believe we're even having this conversation," she said sharply, but tension filled the air. Margaret sensed a crack in the armor. "Let us put to a vote," Margaret proposed, her voice firm. "Do we want to create a community of compassion or a community of exclusion?" The moment hung there, suspended in uncertainty. Would the board embrace change, or would they retreat to safety and status quo? As murmurs grew louder, Margaret knew she had ignited a flame that could burn down the barriers that had kept Ruth and countless others locked away in the shadows. But she also understood the storm she had entered. The stakes were high, and nothing worth fighting for came easy. Later that evening, as she stepped outside, the cool breeze felt refreshing against her heated skin. Her heart fluttered with a mixture of fear and hope. Whatever the outcome of the meeting, she was no longer just an observer. She was a participant in the story of a town that needed to redefine itself. But as she walked away, a sense of foreboding crept in. What if she faced backlash from her peers? What if they turned against her? The questions buzzed in her mind, like bees, relentless and demanding answers. The road ahead was unclear, and uncertainty loomed closer than ever. Would Margaret have the strength to stand up for Ruth, even if it cost her all she had? The next morning, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, the sunlight streaming in and illuminating the pile of papers before her. Her coffee had gone cold, untouched, forgotten amid her racing thoughts. She stared blankly at the screen of her laptop, waiting for inspiration or clarity to strike. The meeting had left her charged but shaken. Could she really stand her ground if the board decided against her? As she contemplated her next steps, Her phone buzzed aggressively on the table. It was a message from her friend David, a fellow activist who had long fought for homeless rights in town. "Hey, heard about the board meeting. Can we talk?" Margaret's heart quickened. David was a catalyst for change, always ready for action. She replied swiftly, "Yes. Can you meet me at the cafe?" Within an hour, they were seated together at their favorite booth, the scent of fresh pastries swirling around them. David wasted no time. "Margaret, what you did yesterday, it was powerful. You really shook things up." She smiled weakly. "But what if the board ignores us? What if I put everything on the line for nothing?" David leaned in, his expression serious. "Even if they don't follow through with the vote, you planted a seed. You inspired others to think differently, maybe even act on it. It's not just about that meeting. It's about changing hearts." His words resonated with her, sparking a flicker of hope she desperately needed. "I just wish I could do more. There's so many Ruths out there, then do something." He urged, his hands animated. "Let us start a fundraiser. We can gather the community, share Ruth's story, and get people talking. We need to show that compassion can create impact." Margaret considered this. But what if we fail? What if people don't show up, and we put our energy into something that goes nowhere? Then we learn and try again. You said it yourself. If we don't fight for them, what does that say about us? This isn't just about Ruth. It's about so many others who deserve a chance. "They need us," David said, his voice determined. Margaret felt the warmth of his passion seep into her own heart. "You're right. I can't just wait on a board decision. I need to act." With new resolve, they began to brainstorm logistics, ideas flowing freely between them. As Margaret jotted down notes, she felt a sense of clarity wash over her. They could create a movement, one that reached beyond the walls of the boardroom. The next few days were a blur of activity. Margaret collaborated with David and other volunteers, setting up the fundraiser that would debut at the upcoming community fair. Flyers were distributed, and social media buzzed with talk of Ruth and the plight of the homeless in their town. Each conversation felt like a flicker of light against the encroaching darkness. But then, just as things seemed to be gaining momentum, a storm brewed on the horizon. Rumors swirled about her rebellion at the board meeting, and whispers of discontent began to echo through the hallways of the community. Just when she thought she might be on the verge of creating tangible change, doubt seeped back in. Would her efforts hold up against the tide of resistance from those who preferred the status quo? Would she be cast out, labeled the troublemaker for simply advocating compassion? On the day of the fundraiser, nerves knitted in the pit of her stomach like a tight fist. As she and David set up the booth, she could see faces she recognized, friends, neighbors, but also people who had been on the other side of the discussions, those loyal to the old ways. Margaret took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was here. It wasn't just for Ruth. It was for every person who had ever felt invisible. With her heart racing, she stood up to welcome the crowd, unsure of the reception she would receive. "Thank you all for being here today," she started, her voice infused with a blend of passion and uncertainty. "We're here to talk about real lives, about building a real community. Together, we can make a difference." Suddenly, a sharp voice broke through the crowd, one that she had feared would speak against her. "What are you really doing, Margaret? Are you just trying to stir up trouble?" As tension crackled in the air, Margaret felt her resolve collide with fear. She knew the moment had arrived to stand not just for Ruth, but for everyone standing behind her. But could she hold her ground against the impending storm? Would her voice echo loud enough to stir the hearts of her community? Margaret's heart raced. The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and she could feel all eyes on her. "I'm not here to stir up trouble," she began, gathering her thoughts before the gathering crowd. "I'm here because the trouble already exists. People like Ruth, they need us. They deserve more than just a few murmurs when they pass by on the street." A murmur of agreement rippled through part of the crowd, but the sharp voice of dissent still echoed in her mind. She looked out at the faces before her, seeking a connection, a sign of understanding. The frowning faces stood out amidst the nodding heads. She could almost pinpoint the resistance. "If we continue to turn our backs," she pressed on, feeling the warmth of her own conviction, "we're letting fear win. fear that change will disrupt our comfortable lives. David stood beside her, his expression unwavering. He moved closer to her, offering silent strength. Ruth's story is not just one of hardship, it's about community, about how we all have a role to play. Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength. I refuse to believe that doing nothing is the only option. Taking a deep breath, she caught sight of Ruth, standing quietly at the edge of the gathering. For a split second, their eyes met, and Margaret felt a surge of determination. Ruth is not alone. We all have a responsibility to reach out, to listen, and to help. If we come together as a community, we can lift each other up if we only dare to care. The tension palpably shifted. Margaret could sense more individuals nodding, their hearts beginning to open. The harsh voice that had called her out seemed to fade, drowned by the mingling of supportive murmurs. But just as Margaret felt a hint of victory, she was struck by an uncomfortable sensation. Was this truly enough? Her confidence wavered. A woman stepped forward, her eyes aflame with anger. What do you expect us to do? Empty our pockets for people who won't even try to help themselves? Margaret's stomach twisted. That was the fear she had known all along. The fear that compassion would be met with scorn. The crowd's whispers reached a fever pitch, some arguing, some in support. It felt like a tightrope walk, and she was still trying to find her balance. Maybe we can't save everyone, Margaret replied, her voice steadying like a rock amidst turbulent waters. But we can start with one person, one story. Ruth deserves that chance. We deserve that chance to bring empathy back into our lives. A hush fell over the crowd, each person processing her words. She knew there was no magic solution. No one speech would turn every heart, but every moment counted. Finally, she spotted a few familiar faces joining Ruth. Stepping forward to support her caused the heartbeat of change was starting to pulse. David whispered in her ear, "You're doing it, Margaret. Just keep going." Suddenly, Ruth stepped into the light. The weariness in her eyes mingled with a spark of courage. I've been afraid, too," she said, her voice trembling. "But I believe in this. I've seen the kindness of strangers. It's powerful." A soft clamor of agreement bubbled up, and Margaret felt the warmth of hope envelop her. Maybe they could inspire something magnificent, something that had the potential to spread beyond the limits of the community fair. But as the warmth grew, so did a dark shadow in the back of her mind. Would this spark last? Was it truly enough to create change? And just then, a figure appeared at the edge of the crowd, a look of determination etched deeply on their face, eyes locked onto Margaret. "Margaret," the figure boomed, "I represent the board, and you've made quite an impression." An icy wave of uncertainty washed over her as the murmurs of the crowd subsided. All eyes now focused on this new presence. What do they want? With her heart pounding, Margaret realized that the moment of truth had arrived. Would they support her vision for change, or would this be yet another barrier to overcome? Margaret felt the air turn heavy. The figure in the crowd stood tall, a well-dressed man with a demeanor that screamed authority. His brow furrowed ever so slightly, betraying a flicker of annoyance. What had she done? The crowd's energy shifted, and she felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her like a thick blanket. "Your speech has stirred quite a conversation," the man continued. His tone was cool and distant, yet a hint of curiosity danced beneath his words. "But you don't seem to understand the complexities at play. We're talking about budgets, allocations, and, frankly, the direction this community chooses to take." Margaret swallowed hard. Hesitation clutched at her throat. This was the moment she had feared, the moment that could either ignite her cause or extinguish the flicker of hope she had kindled. "I do understand," she replied, feeling the tremor of her voice, but pushing forward, "that people are suffering. You can't put a price on compassion." His look softened imperceptibly, but she noticed. "Compassion? Yes. But you must understand, the board has obligations to consider." The crowd finally began to murmur again. Some faces leaned in closer, eager to catch every word, while others turned back, skeptical of this sudden encounter. Obligations? David finally spoke, stepping forward beside her. What about our obligations to each other as members of this community? Isn't it our job to ensure everyone has a voice? A ripple of agreement surged through the crowd. Margaret wanted to grab onto that energy, but a small voice in her head reminded her of how fragile their support felt. The board member's face darkened a degree, as if the unity around them was sparking a fire he didn't want to feed. Don't mistake our generosity for weakness, he warned, his voice dropping into a low growl. This isn't just about one person's story. It requires resources. Maybe it shouldn't be about resources, Margaret challenged, feeling a rush of adrenaline. Maybe it should be about connection. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. There was a stillness where even the wind held its breath. Margaret could see the hope and fear dancing in the eyes of the crowd. People hung on her words, ready for a shift. Suddenly, Ruth stepped forward again, her voice shaky but stronger than before. It's not just about money. It's about our humanity. You can't budget kindness. The crowd erupted into a chorus of approval, but Margaret felt a crackle of fear. Would they sustain this? With the two of them standing strong, Ruth's presence beside her seemed to fortify Margaret's resolve. She turned back to the board member, determination coursing through her veins. Listen, no one is asking for charity. We're asking for a chance to come together, to create a support system, one that empowers people like Ruth. From somewhere in the crowd, a woman called out, "We can volunteer. We can organize. We don't need to wait for the board to do what's right." More voices joined in. Ideas flowed like a river breaking through a dam. Fundraisers, food drives, mentorship programs. The board member looked taken aback, his brows lifting in disbelief as the community began to pulse with a rhythm of shared enthusiasm. But even amidst the hopeful cries, a sliver of doubt lingered in Margaret's heart. Was this truly the beginning of a movement, or merely a fleeting moment? Would this man's influence crush them, or could they build something real? Margaret, the board member finally said, his tone softening just slightly, "I didn't come here to extinguish your flame, but can you truly sustain this momentum?" She held his gaze, her heart pounding. "With this community, I believe we can, if only we're given a chance." As the crowd erupted into fervent discussions, Margaret could feel the weight of their collective passion and fear, a volatile mixture that could either forge a path forward or lead to disillusionment. What would happen when the dust settled? Could their voices remain united against the powerful forces that threatened to tear them apart? The afternoon sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows over the crowd. And just as Margaret thought they had inspired a new hope, a woman from the back of the throng stepped forward, clutching something close to her chest. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice trembling with urgency. "You need to see this." The crowd turned, a palpable tension rising as they awaited what revelation would shift their hearts once again. The woman stepped forward, her hands trembling. She held a crumpled piece of paper, her fingers grasping it like it contained the secrets of the universe. The crowd hushed, anticipation hanging in the air. Who was she? What was so vital that it warranted interrupting the fervor of the moment? "Please, everyone, listen." Her voice wavered, but was laced with a thread of urgency. "I found this in the pocket of my late grandmother's coat." A murmur swept through the crowd, eyes widening in curiosity. The woman took a deep breath, her cheeks flushed. She was a part of this community for decades, but I never knew her struggles until now. "I think it's time you all see." She pulled the paper free, smoothing it against the fabric of her dress. Margaret felt her heart quicken. Whatever this was, it seemed to be more than a personal story. It felt like a lifeline to understanding a shared history. The woman cleared her throat and read aloud. "To whom it may concern, my name is Eloise. I write this letter in hopes someone will hold it close when I'm gone. I have lived a life filled with hardship. I've lost family, a home, and many friends along the way. Yet what I've witnessed in this community, the kindness in strangers, those moments have carried me." Margaret's stomach flipped. The raw vulnerability of Eloise's words resonated deeply. There was something remarkably familiar about the struggle described. It evoked emotions and memories of countless other individual battles echoing throughout the crowd. As the woman continued reading, the crowd was visibly moved. I want you to know that every time someone offered a meal, shared a kind word, or just listened, it gave me strength. I learned that we must lean on each other, for that is the true essence of our humanity. Ruth stepped a little closer to Margaret, eyes glistening. This is what we're fighting for, Margaret. It's the connections we create, not the numbers on a spreadsheet. The words hung in the air, filling the space between them with shared understanding. They were all connected in some way, through pain, love, or even the simple act of listening. The crowd, now fully engrossed, began to express their thoughts. Yes, this is our story too. Someone shouted from the back. Others voiced their agreement, rising to share their experiences, their struggles spilling into the open like water from a broken dam. The energy pulsated with a newfound purpose. Margaret looked at the board member. His expression creased with a hint of vulnerability, the tough demeanor fading. This was shifting him, but would it shift the power dynamics of the board? Suddenly, the woman paused, her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for something or someone. Eloise spoke of change, of making our voices heard. She hoped that wisdom would inspire action. We cannot wait for permission to begin caring for each other. The applause was loud and resounding, echoing off the buildings around them, and Margaret could feel her heart racing. But just as momentum built, the board member cleared his throat. I admire what you've shared today, but action comes with plans. We can't do this without a strategy or structure. Why can't we write our own plan? David challenged. Change starts here, with us. Why are we waiting on a board? The crowd erupted once more, voices blending in a harmonious plea for unity. The color in the board member's face shifted as he met Margaret's gaze. Would he allow this movement to gain the strength it needed? Just then, the woman stepped forward again, her face determined. I have an idea, an event we could organize to embody this spirit of connection. We could call it Together We Rise. Margaret's heart soared with possibility. They were given a whisper of hope, but could they truly harness that energy into something real? As the crowd buzzed with excitement, Margaret glanced into the faces around her, feeling both fear and excitement surge within her. They could change everything, but the real question lingered. Would they be brave enough to confront the establishment and redefine community for good? Before she could unravel her thoughts, another voice broke through. What if we faced the board at their next meeting? A hush fell over the crowd, a potent silence that held the weight of an unvoiced decision. Would they stand together against the very powers that sought to diminish their courage? The crowd held its collective breath, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Margaret could feel the weight of uncertainty draping over them like a heavy blanket. People exchanged glances, calculating, weighing the gravity of what was being suggested. What if we do? Another voice called out, brimming with defiance. What if we stand together? Let us show them we're not just numbers, but real people with stories and dreams. A sense of solidarity rippled through the crowd, invigorating their spirits. Margaret felt her heartbeat quicken. This was the spark they needed. But then that nagging worry squeezed her chest. What if they faltered? What if the board didn't listen? The woman who had first stepped forward stood taller now, scanning the crowd with fierce determination. What's stopping us? She challenged, her words echoing. We've waited long enough for permission. We have each other, and that's more than enough. Yes, someone shouted, and soon more voices joined in, raising the energy until it surged like waves crashing against a cliff. We are ready. We will not be silenced. Margaret allowed herself a moment of hope. The power of unity was something special, something that couldn't be fabricated in the boardroom or calculated in numbers on a report. But as her excitement surged, anxiety bubbled beneath it. Would they really be able to change anything? David stepped forward again, his face shining with conviction. We can't just meet them in the meeting room. We need to show up in numbers that they can't ignore a march. We'll take to the streets, demanding to be heard. The thought struck Margaret like a lightning bolt. A march. It wasn't just a meeting, it was a movement. Her heart raced at the vision of people from all walks of life, banding together, holding signs, chanting for change. Together we rise. March for our voices. She yelled, her words bursting forth like a fresh dawn. The crowd erupted in agreement, the resonance of their enthusiasm forging an unbreakable bond among them. As they began forming small groups to brainstorm ideas, creating banners, strategies for promotion, and safe routes, Margaret glanced over at the board member. His expression was a mix of disbelief and concern. She knew this was unsettling for him, but it felt like sweet justice. Ruth caught Margaret's eye, a broad smile lighting her face. "This is it, Margaret. This is what Eloise would V wanted." Margaret nodded, feeling gratitude wash over her for this moment, for this community. Yet doubt crept in again. Could they really pull this off? As the excitement surrounded her, somewhere deep within, the fear of failure also lurked. The woman with the letter came to Margaret's side, bright eyes filled with steadfast resolve. "We just have to believe in each other. Everyone here represents a story, a heart that beats for change. Let us take that out into the world." The crowd surged around them, and Margaret felt unexpectedly buoyed by the shared conviction. But before she could voice her thoughts, David reminded them, "We need a date. Let us set it now. Not another minute wasted." As the crowd began to discuss logistics and set a date, Margaret noticed the ebb and flow of emotions in the faces around her. Determination, hope, and a touch of fear flickered in their eyes. So much hung in the air, so many lives intertwined in this collective moment. They spoke of visions, dreams, and desires that had long been buried. Each voice added a thread to the fabric of change they were weaving together. Their passion was electric, but as they began to finalize plans, Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. What would happen when they confronted the board? Would they stand resilient, or would the weight of authority crush their spirit? "Together we rise." They linked arms and shouted, but as the cheers echoed, a whisper of doubt flickered in Margaret's heart. This was just the beginning. The real test lay ahead. As the crowd continued their fervent conversations, a shadow loomed in the doorway of the building behind them. Someone was watching someone who would do anything to keep the status quo intact. What would that mean for their uprising? The excitement in the air was palpable, charged like thunder before the storm. Margaret could see the fire in each face surrounding her. They were ready to fight for what they believed in, the collective energy almost overwhelming. Yet, even as enthusiasm buzzed around her, the shadow from the doorway lingered in her mind, casting doubt. "Let us aim for 2 weeks from today." David's voice rang out, punctuating the moment. Everyone looked to each other, nodding in agreement, and Margaret felt a rush of adrenaline. Was it truly possible to pull this off? They began to plan with a frenetic energy, ideas sparking and bouncing like pinballs. Groups formed, voices rose, and soon they were discussing signs with bold letters, catchy slogans, and safe meeting points. Margaret wished she could hold on to each word, every smile, and every look of fierce determination. But in the midst of all this fervor, the memory of Eloise surfaced in her mind. Would she have been here today, marching with them? A pang of sadness hit her. They all carried pieces of Eloise in their hearts, and it felt heavier now, like a weight that reminded them of their loss, but also of their purpose. Suddenly, a gruff voice cut through the excitement. "What if we can't get the permits? What if the board doesn't approve us marching?" It came from a man in the back, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The crowd fell silent, and Margaret's heart sank. "Then we march anyway," shouted Ruth, her voice fierce and unwavering. "We don't need their permission to assert our rights." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Was it really that simple? They were stepping into unknown territory. Some looked uneasy, others were ignited. Margaret knew they stood at a crossroads. It was more than just a march, it was a statement. "I'm in," a young woman piped up, her eyes bright with passion. "We can't wait for them." Not anymore. Momentum built again, voices rising in solidarity. Each face reflected a unique story of pain, hope, and resilience. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes as they collectively reclaimed their narrative, breathing life into their struggles. As the plans took shape, the woman from earlier pressed closer to Margaret, her voice soft. "I get it, you're nervous. I am too. But what we're doing matters. It matters for us and for those who can't speak up." With those words, Margaret felt a warmth spread through her, a light that could push back against the shadows. What if they could actually make change happen? Suddenly, a piercing alarm broke the momentum, shattering their moment of harmony. A police siren wailed in the distance, swiftly growing closer. The energy around them shifted abruptly. "What is going on?" someone whispered, and Margaret's heart raced. She turned to see the board member stepping toward them, his face pale and eyes scanning the gathering like a hawk assessing prey. "You need to break this up now," he barked, his voice sharp with authority. "No." David raised his voice defiantly, stepping forward. "We're exercising our right to peacefully assemble." The tension thickened. Something's brewing beneath the surface. The world was about to change, but at what cost? Margaret felt fear creeping in again, a heavy hand resting on her shoulder. Was this the moment it all fell apart? Could they truly stand firm against the escalating confrontation? The crowd swayed like leaves in a wind, unsure of the path ahead. Margaret held her breath, a mixture of hope and terror knotting in her stomach. And then, the looming figure in the doorway stepped fully out of the shadows. Who was it? And what would their presence mean for everything they had built? The stakes had never been higher. The figure stepped into the light, casting a long shadow across the floor, and Margaret gasped. It was Mrs. Henderson, the wealthy philanthropist who had engaged with the community in countless ways, but who often stayed behind the scenes. Her presence was unexpected and out of place, yet it stirred something in Margaret. Was it hope or anxiety? "Margaret," Mrs. Henderson called, her voice carrying an unexpected warmth, breaking through the thick tension that surrounded the crowd. "You don't need to be afraid." Fear felt all-consuming, but as Margaret looked around, she saw the same mix of uncertainty and curiosity on every face. Mrs. Henderson took a step closer, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Our town has forgotten the importance of your voices," she continued. "We stand on the verge of something important, something powerful." A ripple of acknowledgement spread through the crowd at her words. "Why are you here?" David asked, his voice steady yet questioning, trying to decipher her agenda. "I'm here to listen," she replied calmly, "and to help, if you'll allow me." The plea in her voice resonated with Margaret. Maybe Mrs. Henderson could be an ally, someone with the influence to support their cause. "What do you mean?" Ruth called out, her tone a mix of skepticism and hope. "What isn't it for you?" Mrs. Henderson took a deep breath, her eyes softening. "I've been using my resources for too long in the wrong ways. I need to get back to what community means. I want to support genuine change, starting right here with you." Margaret felt a surge of emotion as she processed those words. Could this truly be a turning point? Mrs. Henderson was someone who had often felt like a distant figure, but now she was here, willing to stand alongside them. Just then, a voice shouted from the back, "Why should we trust you? You're a part of the system that oppresses us." It was a harsh reminder that not everyone was ready to embrace this stranger into their ranks. Margaret's heart raced again. Trust was fragile, especially after all they had been through. "Because I'm willing to listen to you. How can I help make this happen?" Mrs. Henderson's sincerity hung in the air. In that moment, Margaret realized how crucial this was. They had the chance to bridge divides and bring in someone who could amplify their message. But what if it was a trap? Her internal struggle was palpable. Ruth's voice broke through her thoughts, a mixture of determination and doubt. "Let's speak first. If you truly want to help, you should know what we stand for." As the tension wavered, Margaret felt the crowd shift, from skepticism to cautious interest. Those surrounding her exchanged looks of quiet deliberation. Would they find the strength to allow this unexpected partnership? Margaret took a step forward, her gut tightening with the weight of it all. "We are fighting for our rights. We want to be heard. We want to be respected." Her heart thudded in her chest as she held Mrs. Henderson's gaze. We want to build a community where everyone feels safe. The air crackled with possibility. As the sirens faded slightly in the distance, time seemed suspended. She dared to hope, could they actually create something meaningful together? But then, the sudden blare of another siren shattered the moment, bringing their focus back to the looming threat. Would this opportunity slip through their fingers before they could seize it? Margaret felt the uncertainty swirling around her once again, but so too did she feel the spark of hope. Was this the beginning of forging a new path, or the end of everything they had dreamed? As murmurs swept through the crowd, she knew decisions had to be made quickly. The moment of truth was drawing near. Would they stand united, or would fear drive them apart? As the sirens wailed closer, their piercing sound dancing with the electric energy of the crowd, Margaret could sense the urgency hanging thick in the air. The moment of truth had arrived. Standing before her was an unexpected ally, a woman of influence who could change everything if they could trust her. Mrs. Henderson took a single step forward, her voice rising above the clamor. I'm here to support you, but words don't mean much without action. What can we do together to ensure your voices are heard? The crowd's tension softened ever so slightly. Curiosity piqued at the prospect of potential collaboration. Margaret took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. We're united in our fight for compassion, starting with Ruth. We're ready to march, to show everyone in this town we won back down. The crowd erupted with approval, voices mingling like a symphony of hope. You see? Mrs. Henderson smiled. The warmth of her presence filled with sincerity. That's the spirit we need to channel. We can gather resources and organize this effectively. David stepped up beside Margaret, his eyes locked on the crowd, affirming their newfound unity. We need to craft our message the story of our community. Let Ruth represent that. It's not just about her. It's about every single person we're fighting for. Ruth's presence solidified their resolve. She stood tall, manual labor earned in her hands, trembling yet steady. I want to tell my story. If it creates change, if it gives hope to anyone struggling out there, then it's worth it. We've suffered in silence for too long. Margaret's heart swelled, pride blossoming at Ruth's courage. The weight of her own doubts seemed to lighten. Exactly. Everyone here has a story. We march for all of us, to uplift every voice that has been silenced. The crowd roared in response. A beautiful wave of energy radiated like sunlight breaking through the clouds. Together we rise indeed, someone shouted, and a renewed spirit filled the air. But the shadows of uncertainty still loomed as Margaret sensed the rift in the crowd. A few still lingered in hesitancy, whispering fears of possible retaliation. Feeling the weight of their apprehension, she turned to address them directly. Change is scary, I get it. But how can we justify remaining silent when lives are at stake? We have a chance to stand up for each other. Whispers turned to murmurs of agreement, and Margaret drove the point home with a steady voice. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's standing up despite it. We're not just against the agenda of the board. We're for the lives of our neighbors, for the dignity and respect that everyone deserves. As if feeling her strength, Ruth nodded. And if we march and they attempt to silence us, let them see us. Let them feel our resolve, not just our fear. Together, we can't be ignored. At those words, a sense of unity poured over the community like a surge of fresh air. Margaret saw faces lighting up, the flickering hope igniting their spirits once more. Even those who had been uncertain began shifting toward more resolute expressions. Mrs. Henderson, David called out, will you join us? Can we count on you to be our advocate? With a determined nod, Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her presence grounding them as she asserted yes. I'll use my connections to gain permissions, secure resources, and help spread the message. This is just the beginning. The atmosphere swelled with promise. Excitement radiated among the gathered crowd. However, Margaret's heart raced as a chill crept in again. Would this blend of valued voices truly transform into a reality? Before she could worry further, a centralized energy tightened around them as they rallied together to plan their march. Signs were crafted, slogans were generated. Inspired emotions melded into inspiring lyrics, a collective anthem of hope. The following days blurred into an infectious swirl of creativity, compassion, and planning. Community meetings buzzed, bustling with anticipation, stories shared, and integrity woven into every banner and sign. Painstakingly created. Yet, with all that enthusiasm came the bitter undercurrent of insecurity. What would happen when they faced the board on the day of the march? Thoughts of retaliation nagged at her. Would the desire for connection hold amidst the pressures pushing against them? Finally, the day of the march arrived. The morning sun cast a shimmering light over the crowd of supporters gathering, each more impressive than the last. Neighbors, friends, and families emerged, their signs adorned with messages of support for Ruth, unity, and the rightful claim for love and kindness. "Let us do this together," Margaret called, feeling a buoyant surge of confidence fill the air. For Ruth, for each other. The crowd surged forward. Footsteps echoed against the pavement like drums in a powerful orchestra, resonating with the fear and hope they all carried. As they approached the board's headquarters, Margaret's heart soared and plummeted simultaneously. It was happening. They were here. But would they be met with understanding or opposition? With every step she took, every voice that chimed in harmony beside her, her strength grew. They were more than a single march. They were a movement, a family of individuals demanding their voices be heard. At the last moment, as the building loomed ahead, anticipation crackling in the air, a voice broke through. "Together, we rise." The crowd joined in, hearts pounding as they prepared to show the world the power of compassion and connection. In that thrilling moment, all doubts faded as Margaret locked eyes with Ruth, their hearts beating in sync. It wasn't just about them anymore. This was about rewriting the story of their community together. As they approached the doors, conscious of the potential resistance ahead, there was an undeniable sense of unity. Whatever happened next would be transformational. They had stepped into the light. The echoes of the rallying cry rippled on, strong and unwavering. "We will not be silenced." And then, they marched together into the unknown, ready to challenge everything they had known, ready to change the narrative, ready to create a future marked by compassion, courage, and community. Now, don't wait another second. You need to subscribe immediately to our channel so you won't miss the next exclusive stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and show your support. Comment below how this story impacted you, and share this video with at least 5 friends who need to experience this transformation. This is the moment to stand up and be counted as a true fan. Your engagement matters.